Braun Paxettes. Now the Paxettes were interesting cameras. They were known as the poor man's Leica, and they're not exactly Leicas, but they're interesting cameras all the same. I've got two examples here, both of which need some repair. The simple type, this one here, it has no rangefinder, not even an uncoupled rangefinder. The second window here is an extinction meter. It's a type of light meter where you peer through it, and the number that you can, the largest number that you can clearly recognise, you read that off on the chart and it tells you what your exposure should be. They don't work very well. The camera itself, no interchangeable lens, simple adjustment for your focus here, so estimate your distance, set the focus, you're as good as gold. The shutter, pronto shutter, nice and simple, and not much more to say about it really, very simple camera. This one's got a problem. Film advance is locked, shutter release you can press it, nothing's happening, so what's going on there is anyone's guess, but it certainly needs to be dealt with. Pop that to one side. Here we have an upmarket model. This one is the Paxette Super. What made it super? Well, what made it super mostly was the fact that it's got a coupled rangefinder. And this one has interchangeable lenses too, so this is really good. You can unscrew your lens. There was a selection of lenses available, quite a reasonable selection actually. And they're all sort of an M39 thread, I think. It's basically the same thread as Leica used, but there's a difference. And the difference is the distance between the mount and the film plane is quite different. So you can't put your Leica lenses on your Braun Paxette, and you can't put your Paxette lenses on your Leica. It's not going to work well for you. Okay, so there's the differences there. And this one, what are its features? Well, as I said, it's got a coupled rangefinder, interchangeable lenses, the shutter, Pronto SVS, so a little bit more of a swept up shutter, and it's got speeds to a 300th of a second. And this one, what's its problems? Well, the biggest problem is this. Film rewind, the advance just really doesn't want to move smoothly. Does the shutter go? I think it does. Yeah, that fires well enough. The lens on this one's not particularly pretty, but then again, being an interchangeable lens, you could find another lens without too much trouble. So, both of these cameras need to be repaired because neither of them work particularly well. Let's start with the simple one. So we've got a locked film advance there, and I can see something interesting here immediately. I'll zoom you in. Now here I can see a little tab sticking out. Now I happen to know that that tab shouldn't be sitting there at all. That tab should be engaged with a notch in the top of the housing. That's our return spring for our film advance lever, which tells me something interesting, because not only do we know that the return spring's not working, the film advance is not working either. And I strongly suspect someone has been in there and mucked with things. You can dismantle the film advance on these from the top, and that'll get you by for dismantling, and it won't help you at all putting them back together. Let's take it apart and see. Single screw in the middle there. It's quite possible that this doesn't have all the pieces present. There's our screw. I'm lifting off the lever. I'm sliding under that with my tweezers to pull these pieces off all together in one piece. Let's get you focused on this. Okay, so this plate, it's got a little tab on it. This tab here, and that should have engaged. This isn't going to focus for me, is it? That little tab should have engaged with a little notch here in the top housing. Let's see if the other pieces are here. We have a little brass washer. Here's our little ratchet gear. Here's the pawl that engages with that gear. And here is the spring that keeps that little pawl engaged with that wheel. That spring basically keeps this thing pressed into place. Here we have the return spring for the rewind. This tab on this plate, the one that's sticking up, engages with this piece here. The other end of it's engaged with the centre here. I'm going to pull that spring out. It's like a clock spring. It will unwind, fling itself across the room if you're not hanging on to it. And you can see how that thing hooks. It's hooked into that notch there. Just take that off, put it to one side. And here's the rest of the top of our advance lever. And we've basically got two washers in here. And they're stuck in place. One of them's stuck in place. Yeah, it's just stuck in place with grease. Nothing exciting there. That one there will probably come out too if I poked at it. Yeah, it's stuck in with grease again. So those pieces, those are all the pieces that we should have. That's for the top, the lever on the top of our film advance. Let's bring the camera back in. Now this is the state you will often find these Paxettes missing the top of the lever because someone got this deep into it and couldn't put it back together again. We'll deal with the reassembly later. So if we want to get any deeper, because this still doesn't want to turn, we're going to have to get into this a little bit deeper than this. So let's open the camera up. Just unscrewing that, I'm going to remove the camera back. This knob is fixed on from underneath. We need to get to that. So we'll start here with this plate. There's a big screw here. Might need a bigger screwdriver than that on that one. See what I've got here that'll do that job. Well, that's not exactly the right thing, but it might do it. It will. This is the piece that would hold your film cassette in place. So we've got a wavy washer and a screw and this piece. We've got two screws here. Hold this plate onto the base of the camera. That's got our tripod socket and so forth on it. Okay, and there is a washer that came out from under something. I think it was probably in the centre here, that screw. So our take-up spool, that should lift off. Now here I've got my pressure plate on this camera that's fixed to the base. Here, this screw here is what we're interested in now. That holds this piece and this little drive dog here, that couples to your take-up spool. And this is a friction clutch in here. It's got quite a strong spring, but this is probably just gummed up too. Let's take this apart. Here's the screw. There's a sleeve. It's got a squared hole in the middle where it engages with the shaft. Here's a spring. Here's the drive dog that connects with our film cassette, and inside that there's just a plain washer that spring would bear on. And here we can see the shaft from the film advance knob coming through, and it goes right through that gear there. That'll probably push out now. Let's have a look. Yeah, it does. So I've pushed that out and the gear's just fallen into my hand. This is our actual film advance knob. This is actually broken. This spring should be continuous here. It's cracked and broken. That's probably why it was jammed. Let's bring back the camera body. What happens when this is all working is as this knob is rotated, this area here, that spiral, engages with this arm here. And this arm is then pulled out, which cocks the shutter, and it returns to a rest position there. And in that rest position, it blocks the further advance of the knob. Let's see if the shutter fires now. It does. So our problem with this camera stems solely from this piece here. And this spring here, that should be a closed loop. It's broken. I have to see if I've got one lying around in my spare parts. Well, here's our one with the broken spring, and I sort through my collection of motley parts. Shows me a few different pieces here. This one has no spring. It looks like it never had a spring. It must be an earlier one. This one clearly did have a spring. The spring's not present. Same with this one, but here's a stray spring. So I strongly suspect that if we replace this spring, which fits in there like that, this camera will be up and running again. So how do you take this apart? Well, there's just a single screw here, holds that spring over its post. We'll take that out. There's the end of the spring. You can see where this one was broken, and I'll get this out. It's probably quite a strong spring. It is. And you can see how these two pieces should have gone together somewhat like this. I'll just get this in. This piece here, the hook shaped one, fits over that loop, and we should be able to fit this straight in with a bit of luck, with hardly any fighting. At least that's the idea. It doesn't really want to fit into that recess. Oh, is that spring not tucked down in there tightly? It's almost as if the spring's a bit too long. Alright, let me check the old spring against the new spring and make sure that it's from an equivalent device, I suppose. Just holding this in with my hand to see if it looks the same. Actually, it does look the same. So that leads me to believe that basically it's just going to be a struggle to put this thing in, and that's all there is to it. But struggle it certainly is. pull that spring in tight there, will that help? Oh, interesting or interesting. Okay, this is fun. See if I can, might need to find more tools to achieve this. So yeah, this piece here, there's obviously space taken up there, space taken up here, so I've got to pull this thing further back into that recess, and the spring tension is such that it does not want to go. What about if I reshape it slightly? Well, it's all over by bar the shouting, but it doesn't want to go on. Just on the possibility that they've changed something and it was made to fit this other style. Let's try this one. I don't think it will make a difference, but you can never tell. Well, it looks like it's going to go. Oh, I'm on the wrong side of that arm of the spring, that's why it won't go. Okay, I think this will go with some fighting. I'll be back in a minute and I'll tell you how I achieved it. It's in, it's back together. What was the secret? The secret was simple. This is the one we took out of the camera. This was the one from my spare parts. Now they are not the same. There's a difference in the machining here, which basically means there's more space in here to take up that spring than there was in the one that I took off the camera. So yes, there was a difference, and the difference meant that the spring fits nicely into the parts wheel. It didn't fit into the one from the camera. So what else have we got on here? Well, here we've got a spring. This is what you call an anti-backup spring, basically. It means that the knob will move easily in one direction, but if you try and turn it in the other direction, that spring tightens up on the shaft and it won't turn. And it's just to stop you rotating the film advance in the wrong direction. Can we fit this back on the camera without a great deal of fighting? Possibly. Let's pop that on there. Of course, we haven't got the wheel on there. Now the shutter's firing instantly as soon as I rotate that and cock the shutter. If If I put the gear back on there, that might not happen. Let's try that. I'll get that screw started. This has to slide down over that squared shaft. Well, of course, it's not going to slide down anywhere at the moment because this spring's holding it up. Let's get this spring down a bit. Rotate this till it engages. That's better. Well, that one is just releasing the shutter as soon as it gets there. That would probably be the cocked point there. So that's not going to work for us. We've got other problems. Right, let's take that off and see if I can figure out what it is. It's probably something to do with the shape of that spring. Take that knob back off the top, take that gear out. What is it about this that's different to its mate? So as the knob rotates, it should pull this in, which cocks the shutter, and it should stay there. It's not pulling it in far enough. It's only pulling it in some of the way and allowing the thing to release, I think. Now we have a film advance which winds round until it locks and the shutter fires. And what was the secret of success? Well, the secret of success was perseverance. I should have persevered in trying to fit the replacement spring into the original wheel because the wheel was slightly different. And basically it came down to the shapes of pieces like this. As this, let's take this back off. As this rotates, it pulls this lever forward until it cocks the shutter. So it's coming around this cam surface here, and then it blocks against this arm. And that stops this from rolling backwards. It pulls it out further and stops it from rolling backwards. Once it's past that stage, it blocks until such stage as the shutter releases and this thing rolls back to its start position. So when it's cocked, it sits halfway across. When it's released, it drops back towards the housing. Now in that cocked position, that blocks against this block here and stops this knob from rotating any further. But basically, although these pieces look much the same, they were not the same. So, traps for young players. I should have known that. I'll certainly know next time. Except hopefully there won't be a next time. See if I can get this knob back on here now. I think that's seated. So we have a camera that winds and fires. So that's good. Of course, that's not much fun, and doubtless the camera's got other problems to deal with. But at least we know what the headline fault was. A broken spring here. And having discovered that, we've got that problem sorted out. I wish problems were as easy to sort as that usually. Right, so with this camera, I think I'll just pop this to one side. Let's investigate the second camera, because that's got problems with the film advance too. Camera number 2. So this one, we've got problems with this advance here. Let's start taking it to pieces, see if we can find out what the problem is. That screw is very, very tight and might need some encouragement. I'll have to find a screwdriver that fits that very, very well, I think. This one might do it. Okay, that screw is coming out. Let's see if this is similar to the other one. Take the screw out. It almost looks like there's a washer under that screw head. I'll have to check that, it might just be grease and discoloration. Let's take the top off. Oh, the spring flew out. That's a great start. Have we got a full complement of pieces? I think we're short a washer. Everything else looks to be there. And this piece, this disc on the top, that's certainly engaged correctly. You can see it's very, very filthy looking. I suspect we're short one of those brass washers there. What about the film advance? Does it otherwise rotate smoothly? It does. So our film advance, the stiffness with the film advance lever is all to do with these components, which are very, very gummed up and greasy looking. Okay, so how do we go about reassembling this stuff? That is one of those $64 million questions. It ain't easy. Basically, we reassemble the knob complete with this, and then we fit it back to the camera. So a repeat of what we did with the other camera, taking this thing apart. The layout of the screws here looks slightly different. We have no swing over here piece to hold the film cassette in position. Some of these cameras you have to watch because the sprocket shaft starts coming out, or the bush holding the sprocket shaft will start coming out. Now here, let's take that off. Okay, the film advance. Take this screw out. See if the parts are all as they were in the other one. We've got our screw, the collar and the spring. This clutch arrangement, does it have a washer inside it for the spring to bear on? No, it does not. Was there one on the spring? No. The gear, something's sitting here. What's that? It's a film chip. That's one of the pieces of film from between the sprocket holes. We had that washer sitting underneath that gear. There's another washer there too. This knob should just press off now. It does. Let's recover that washer. So we have discrepancies with this camera compared to its mate as to what pieces were present. Not major, but we could certainly do without it. So just making sure I've got a full complement of the interesting pieces. The interesting pieces in particular are this pawl and this spring, because either or both of those are inclined to fly away and never be seen again. This is very gummy, and this, as you can probably see, is exceptionally filthy, and it's gummed up with grit and dust. That will certainly need to be cleaned. Now, interestingly, this is like one of the other styles. It doesn't have that spring. Now, that spring that was on the other camera, that served two purposes. One, it formed the spiral that pulled the cocking arm across, but its important point there was the material, because it was spring steel, so it's very resistant to wearing. This is simply aluminium, and aluminium is not particularly resistant to wearing, so this piece could easily wear out quite a lot. So which came first? Well, if you were changing from one with a spring inside it, which would be stronger, to something that was just aluminium, that would mean that you were cheapening your manufacturing costs by reducing the quality of the product. So is that what happened here? Or are we looking at it back to front? Is this what the original looked like without the spring, and then the later ones had the steel, hardened steel spring there to do the job? I don't really know. So here, anyway, here we have our camera body. You can see the same thing. The shutter would be cocked here. Now that action was quite stiff, noticeably stiffer than the other camera, which suggests that the filth and dust and rubbish that we see here are also through the rest of the camera, making all the action stiff. But the shutter does cock. Okay, well that was interesting. That's a good investigation to find out what was going on. And I'm going to leave it right there for the moment.